Hi, welcome back to these introductory videos for our Radical Bible program. In the first of these introductory videos, we went over some of the basic principles of biblical interpretation that will guide this series, that we're rejecting both a fundamentalist view on the one hand and a personal opinion view on the other, to use instead a contextual approach that enters into the world of the text as much as we can determine what that world is, to try to learn the language and cultural context of the time to make sense of what that text was trying to say to its original audience, and then to try to bring that meaning or set of meanings back into conversation with our world today. So now, given that, I'd like to share with you a little bit of what the fruit of my over 3 decades of working with the biblical texts have revealed to me about the relationship within the collection of the text we have as a Bible. Some people start off with the assumption that the Bible is one consistent point of view and that you can, quote, live according to the Bible. But I'd like to invite us to look at first at these two texts on the screen, Deuteronomy 7 from the Torah in the Hebrew Bible and Matthew 5 from the Sermon on the Mount in the New Testament Gospel of Matthew, to consider what to do about the relationship between these two texts. So let's look first at Deuteronomy 7. So this is Moses speaking from the edge of the Jordan River to the Israelites after the long journey through the wilderness, having left Egypt, about to enter into the Promised Land. So when the Lord your God brings you into the land that you are about to enter and occupy, and he clears away many nations before you, the Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations mightier and more numerous than you, and when the Lord your God gives them over to you and you defeat them, then you must utterly destroy them. Make no covenant with them and show them no mercy. Do not intermarry with them, giving your daughters to their sons or taking their daughters for your sons, for that would turn away your children from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of the Lord would be kindled against you, and he would destroy you quickly. But this is how you must deal with them. Break down their altars, smash their pillars, hew down their sacred poles, and burn their idols with fire. In other words, it's a mandate for holy war. You must destroy them, or God will destroy you. Word of the Lord. Now let's listen to Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. You have heard that it was said, "You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy." But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be complete, therefore, as your heavenly Father is complete. So what do we do with these two texts? Over the centuries, there have been a number of views. One is that the message of Jesus replaces the message of Moses. That Moses is speaking to a quote-unquote Jewish audience, and Jesus is speaking to a Christian audience, and therefore Christianity is superior to Judaism, and Jesus is inviting people to take up the superior version of religion of Christianity. But let's look at the actual text here. So here's the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, and let's note what Jesus says. This was 5:43 and 5:45, etc. Let's look just a little earlier in the same chapter. Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven." Plainly, Jesus, speaking just a little earlier in Matthew's gospel, says, I'm not trying to start a new religion. I'm not replacing the religion of my ancestors with something I'm just making up here from scratch. I'm trying to fulfill it. Well, how is this text in Matthew, to love your enemies, fulfilling a text that demands just the opposite, to destroy enemies? So it's hard to see exactly how those could be consistent from within one view. What I'd like to suggest is they're not consistent. And Jesus knew they weren't consistent, but it doesn't mean that the message that he just said that he's come to fulfill and not to destroy isn't true. What I'd like to suggest here is that The Bible, as we have it, is a collection of writings that reflect an argument among our ancient ancestors between two ways of seeing who God is and seeing who the world is. And I'd like to post here this chart from my 2010 book, Come Out My People. There you can see the cover of it, in which I play this out across the entire Bible. That's not the theme of our series, but where we're going to be looking at individual texts up close, which I couldn't do in one book, of course, but to highlight the premise by which I'm approaching this collection of texts. So first we have to take a step back and say, what do we mean by the word religion? When you hear the word religion, perhaps you hear what I assume most people hear is what I like to call the name brand religions. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, things like that. Initial capital letter that ends with an ism that expresses some kind of static view of a worldview and a set of practices. But I'd like to make this statement, which is at the beginning of the Come Out My People book I just mentioned. There is not now, nor has there ever been, such a thing as Judaism or Christianity. That doesn't mean, of course, those words aren't being used, or there aren't people who call themselves Jews or call themselves Christians. Of course there are. But what I'm trying to say is the word Judaism is used to describe and cover such a wide array of worldview and practices that it's stopped being a meaningful term. And the same with Christianity. The very fact that I had to refute fundamentalism, but fundamentalists call themselves Christians, and say, well, we're not limited to Catholics, but Catholics call themselves Christians, but we're not limited to just Protestants, so Protestants call themselves Christians, highlight what is obvious, is that people who call themselves Christians have been arguing from the very beginning about who God is, who Jesus is, what it means to follow, etc. So I don't find those words helpful as a way of exploring what I mean by religion. What I mean by religion here, and this is not what the term meant in its original context, but it's the root meaning of the Latin religio, meaning to bind again. So I'm going to use the word religion here as a set of worldviews or practices that make a people a people. In other words, that say, I'm not just me and you're not just you, but we're connected because we see the world in the same way and we're going in the same direction, or at least we believe we're going in the same direction until we live our lives and may find maybe not as much as we thought. But a religion is anything that binds people together. Some religions in that sense are weak and some are strong. By weak, I mean they only bind people together for some part of life. So, for example, where I live in the Seattle area, for a long time the Seattle Seahawks were a very powerful football team, and you would see symbols of Seahawk loyalty all around town, in blue and green lights, in the number 12 posted in windows and on walls. And if you weren't from here, you might not know what blue and green symbolize or what 12 suggests. Maybe you think they're religious and it means 12 apostles. But if you were local, you'd know 12 means 12th man, and blue and green are the Seahawks colors. And when the Seahawks won the Super Bowl, which of course takes place in the winter, 700,000 Seattleites and others met downtown for a celebration in frigid cold weather that was atypical of us. So it bound people together very strongly for a moment, and then they all went home and lived their lives. So professional football partisanship is a weak religion in the sense it's very strong for a moment, but it doesn't encompass a lot of people's lives. Something we might not think of as a religion that I think is strong religion is capitalism. That binds people together around a set of symbols like the invisible hand and the free market, and many have written on that, including Harvey Cox and others, on the market as a religion. Another one like that is the military. When somebody, a man or a woman, joins the military, they no longer are a quote-unquote civilian. They are now on the inside and see themselves as a unit, and it's life and death. Unlike sports partisanship, except maybe in Texas high school football, being in the military means you're fighting for your life, and you're fighting for the lives of your colleagues, and you would risk your life to save them, perhaps, and it obviously happens all the time. And so in that sense, being in the Marines is a strong religion, maybe much stronger than people who claim to be Christian is for them, in terms of actually shaping their worldview. Would you die for the people in the pews with you? Maybe you die for the people in the foxhole with you. So we're going to use the word religion in a broad sense of what binds people together around a range of things. And here are that range of things. A strong religion has to have some response to all these kinds of things and maybe more. This is not like an absolute set of categories. So feel free to argue with a set of categories if you like. They're just to illustrate the point. So the Bible contains these two opposing views, sometimes clearly in solid opposition, like Deuteronomy 7 and Matthew 5, and sometimes in more nuanced opposition. Really two ends of a spectrum, as we'll see as we explore specific texts. So in the religion of creation, there's one God, the creator of heaven and earth. In the religion of empire, there are many gods and goddesses. Now, in the Bible, monotheism is largely taken as a given, although not always, as we'll see, although the Israelite authors here, religion of creation or religion of empire, are always for worshiping their own one God. So this one doesn't apply as directly to the Bible as it does to the Bible versus, say, Roman religion or Egyptian religion, but the rest of these do. So God's home in the religion of creation is beyond and within creation, both beyond and within, and among people. But in the religion of empire, it's in a temple near the palace in the royal city, like, say, in Jerusalem. A place of sacred encounters, earth, mountains, rivers, wilderness, direct encounter, table fellowship, and human intimacy. And we see these are the places that Jesus experienced God, like his baptism in the River Jordan, and where he takes his disciples up the mountain, and where he goes after he's baptized out into the wilderness, etc. But in the religion of empire, the place of sacred encounter is in the urban temple, mediated by a priestly elite through urban royal rituals. We could see that in 1 Kings, where we see Solomon leading the elite into ritual sacrifices to celebrate the building of the temple in Jerusalem. The purpose of human life in religion of creation is to praise God with joy and gratitude for the abundant gift of life, and the religion of empire to serve the God through loyalty to empire, which is usually some combination of political and religious justification for social hierarchy and domination by one group over others and over the earth. I won't go over this in great detail, but if you can glance through that yourself, or you can always press pause to study it a little longer, or print the screen if you like, or you can even buy the book if you like. You can see the pattern here of religion of empire and religion of creation. To make that more concrete for our purpose, here's the charts that show how this plays out in the Bible. And I'm sorry for the typo here and making that the wrong color. This is made in old software that I can't change anymore, so I'm stuck with something made in PageMaker for those of you who go back a long way in digital text creation. So here's the timeline, and here are the text, religion of empire text at the top and religion of creation text toward the bottom. And the place they are in relation to the timeline is how strongly they are expressions of one of these two extremes. So we'll see the earliest text written in the Bible, not the earliest text that the story world is about, but the earliest text written is the David and Solomon story, and we'll get to that in the series number 3 that we're doing on the Samuel story. Written as a counter story to that is the Exodus story. So what Pharaoh is here, David and Solomon are there. And what the Israelite slaves are here, the people subject to these kings in Jerusalem are there. Written to say an alternative view. Is God on the side of the king and you need to be obedient to the divinely appointed king? Or is God on the side of people who are oppressed by the king and calling them to be liberated? That's the paradigm that will play out from the earliest biblical texts throughout. And then we see the monarchical history and various compromises of that, while the prophets speak to the religion of creation, trying to call people back to the covenant that's elucidated in Exodus and also in the later text of Leviticus here. And so that takes us up to the exile, and texts that were written during exile, like Genesis. Written to revision, to establish a new view. And Genesis is the first series in our Radical Bible program, suggesting that civilization, that life in cities, was the sin that led people away from God and experiencing the earth with the harmony that God intended. Then we move a little further in time and we get the Second Temple period, where the temple was rebuilt after the Babylonian exile by Persian sponsorship. And we get the texts that support Persian sponsorship and reestablish religion as taking place in a temple in Jerusalem, but then with a limited group of people accessible there. And then we get alternative views, where we get more of the Creator God and more of the sense that everybody is welcome to worship God, whether that's in Jerusalem or wherever else. Then we get a series of empires that take over. After the Persians are the Greeks, and after the Greeks, the Romans. And during this period here, we get the so-called wisdom literature, which is to say an apolitical set of writings that choose not to take sides in the politics of their world, because it was unstable, and it wasn't clear the consequences of taking one side or the other might not cost you later. In other words, it wasn't clear to them where God was guiding them to be in the politics of their world around them. Much much like Christians today argue vociferously about the United States' relationship to, say, Israel or Europe or any other places. It's not like all Christians agree on where God is on politics today. So out of this tradition comes apocalyptic literature. You might never have heard of First Enoch. It's not a book that was collected in the canon of the Bible, but it was important enough to be gathered over hundreds of years and translated into several different ancient languages. So they didn't know that it wasn't going to be in the Bible or was going to be such a thing as the Bible, but they were writing in opposition to those who had settled into collaboration with the empire, even though it cost oppression to most of their colleagues. So these were protest literature. And then we get into the time of Jesus and after. And so we get here to the New Testament writings as firmly religion of creation, which is say Jesus and the Paul take sides on behalf of the God who is the creator, who can be experienced everywhere, who doesn't require you to go through institutional religion and rituals to get there, and includes everybody. But over time, and this comes out in the second volume after Come Out My People in Empire Baptized, where I write about this time period, it gradually forms a Christianity that moves clearly toward the religion of empire, such that Constantine, the Roman emperor, was praised as a celebration of God's victory for Christianity, even though he was a murderous tyrant and obviously a warmonger, as all Roman emperors were. So that's the sequence we get there. So as we go through our text and we actually look at biblical texts, we're going to see how these two religions play out against each other. So the series that we're starting with here, Genesis, a religion of creation text, and the book of Revelation as a religion of creation text, you can see here. But we're also looking at the David story as right here at the beginning, and then we're looking at the Gospel of Luke down here. In other words, just because something is the religion of creation or the religion of empire doesn't mean we shouldn't look at it. It's just as important to understand the writings in the Bible that Jesus opposed, just like it's important today, if you have one view about Christianity, I believe, to understand the views of those with whom you disagree, so we can have civil conversations, but also we can understand what's at stake in people who have different views, rather than just demonizing people as not worth consideration. So I hope that's helpful. Again, as always, feel free to make comments in a civil tone. I'm happy to engage that. And if you'd like to know more about Come Out My People or Empire Baptized, please let me know, and I have other resources on that. I hope these two introductory videos are helpful, and I hope you can dive in wherever you like in the substance of any of the books that we're exploring in this Radical Bible series. Enjoy. Thanks for watching.